Time is Buongiorno a tutti. Good morning, folks. Pedro, I'm sure that as the morning goes on, you're going to gather a whole bunch of people here. This is the early time slot. And we know in the world of the perpetual charrette, it's difficult to get a huge audience, but this is a pretty good audience for 9 in the morning. So I think it's pretty cool. Yeah? Okay. So I want to welcome everybody here today to the final day of thesis reviews. Let me just sort of give you an overview of what's going to be happening. Yesterday at the end of reviews, we had a moment for the reviewers at the very end to sort of summarize what their experience was, for us to thank them. Today at about 1 p.m. we'll do exactly the same thing. We'll ask the reviewers to summarize what they've seen over the course of the day. We'll thank them, then we'll open the floor up because I do know that one of the sad realities is that time is limited, right? So you've discovered that this semester with all the plates you've kept in the air. It's been kind of a vaudeville guy keeping several plates in the air at the same time and making sure that none of them come crashing down. Time is a reality, and sometimes we have to move on. And I don't mean to cut people off, but this does happen periodically. I've usually paid close attention to the front row as I play my role as Donahue, not Jerry Springer, Donahue, passing the microphone back and forth. And I try to keep close attention to making sure our guests have an opportunity to speak. And yesterday I did that maybe 2 or 3 times, and I got feedback from several of our colleagues that they felt left out, and I don't want anybody to feel left out. I really want to make sure that at the end of today, that all of us have an opportunity to talk and discuss and maybe voice up some of the things that may have been left out from yesterday or the day before. So that's the way we're going to work this, and at the very end today we'll do that. And what's going to happen next? And we're going to start, we have 4 presentations this morning. Each of the presentations is on a sequence that will bring us down to the other end of the space as we get there. One of the things I'll just say for the reviewers is that we share this space with all kinds of people taking exams and coming and going in the building. And the only way for us to acoustically own this space is for us to use the sound system. So that, and also, this is actually a learning opportunity for people in the back row. So years ago, just to give you the background on this, one of my favorite people, Alan Chemikoff, great architect from Princeton, was here. And Alan's a brilliant man, has all kinds of great things to say, but he's like that character from Seinfeld. So as a consequence of the low talker syndrome, which exists sometimes when we get very serious about what we're saying, sometimes we turn into low talkers. We really need you to talk into the microphone. It helps everybody to be part of the conversation. It helps to keep it so it's not like a Latin Mass, if you remember pre-Vatican II, when the priests used to talk to the wall and nobody knew what they were saying. This is really trying to expose everything so everybody knows what's going on. So I ask you to do that. I know it's kind of cumbersome. I'll try to facilitate with the microphone. If you feel like you need to talk, if you're sitting in the back row or something like that, and you really do need to talk, let me know. Again, I'm going to have to make a judgment in time to make sure that we get from point A to point B as we're supposed to. Today, we have a group of reviewers with us, some that we recall from the past couple of days and some new ones. Over here on the end is Daniela Sincropi. Daniela is an architect. She is a PhD holder. She teaches with our students in the Maryland in Florence program, the ISI Florence. Both Daniela and Carlo Achille, who is sitting next to her, also an architect, also a practicing architect in Florence and a faculty member with the Maryland in Florence program here today. I'm really glad to have them here because we've been having conversations, Skype conversations over the course of the past year and a half or so, trying to prepare for this last cohort to go through. And the question has constantly been, and this is an interesting kind of question because we've been having this, is that what's the flavor of what you do? If you look at our website, it's really hard to figure out what our students do here. And so today is going to be immersion in Maryland for the 2 of you folks. And so welcome. Very happy to have you here. They will join us faculty afterwards in the end of semester retrospective. And they will see all of the sort of thorny little aspects about the program and hear what we have to say to each other about what works and what doesn't work, what can be better, and so forth. Taking your time away, Sitting in the center here is Juan Penabod, architect, faculty member at the University of Puerto Rico. He's been here for the past couple of days, and we're very happy to have discovered a new friend in you. Suzanne Rettig, past Key professor, who's actually this year's Key professor, architect in Washington, D.C., very celebrated architect, doing work that's incredibly socially conscious and beautiful beyond belief at the same time. Anthony Ames, the man that believes Le Corbusier when cut, a good friend, good to have you back again. This has been just a pleasure. We need to make sure that we don't stay away this long again in the future. Anthony is a former Key professor, much celebrated architect. Probably you've seen his book, 5 Houses, and then there was, what, 5 more houses? And maybe 5 more houses. He's also got, sorry, if I last that long, or you will last, we'll make sure you do. Also been merging into an area of product design, some very beautiful porcelain items that he's been doing that are all purist in their nature. So for the reviewers, our thesis program is a 2-semester, in total 12 credit program. The first semester is 3 credits, is thesis pro seminar where people do research. The second semester is 9 credits where people actually do the design work and more research. The research that they realize they didn't do in the first semester gets done in the second semester. And they produce their entire thesis proposition. Today we're going to begin with Pedro. And Pedro has been looking at Washington, D.C. He's been looking at infrastructure in Washington, D.C., and how infrastructure can often be intrusive, and he's going to try to elevate that infrastructure to the level of some sort of civic discourse. And Pedro's committee was comprised of Steve Hurt over here, Matthew Bell over there, and I was the chair. And it's all yours, Pedro. I'm getting all choked up.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Pedro. First, I'd like to, well, maybe ask for a 10-minute extension. But
who's keeping?
And, well, actually thank my thesis committee, Professor Hurt, for his advice, Professor Matthew Bell for his advice and influence in studio and the ULI competition, which was a journey to say the least. And in this project, Professor Brian Kelly for his advice, his understanding and support at times where I was lost, overwhelmed, fatigued throughout the semester. So it seemed as though you believed in me more than I believed in myself. That was helpful. So I would also like to thank my friends here residing in the architecture building in the past few years for putting up with me. So thank you all. This thesis takes us to Washington, D.C. A city, and it looks into the role that infrastructure plays as it relates to the city. All cities hold within a relationship between infrastructure and the civic. But oftentimes infrastructure is planned in opposition to the civic quality of the city. At its inception, Washington, D.C., a planned city of streets on a grid island, overlaid with avenues on the diagonal, had an incorporated infrastructure. L'Enfant's 1791 drawing shows the line of the Washington City Canal, which once served the heart of the city. With time, this infrastructure was replaced with new infrastructure, the rail. At first, rail infrastructure seemed benign, but as time went on, it became ever more intrusive and problematic, as once found across the National Mall at the foot of the Capitol. By the turn of the 20th century, there was a need to rethink some of that infrastructure. And Daniel Burnham's Union Station building is an example of taking that infrastructure and elevating it to something of civic quality. Before World War II, the southwest region of DC was a diverse, dense, urban environment. And after the Second World War, it was practically all demolished to make way for new development in the image of urban renewal. So the city went from buildings that made streets to buildings to the idea of buildings that flowed in parks independent of the streets. The traditional city's streets and squares, already severed by the railroad, were replaced by an idea of buildings, or abandoned the idea of the street as a place shared by pedestrians and automobiles. And then it was further severed by the addition of the freeway system. And we see that result still today. So this thesis this thesis is focused just south of the Capitol building and west along what is now a discontinued Delaware axis. In fact, it began exactly here in this building, looking at this image without a topic, without a sense of scale for the project, without a sense of typology. And we set out to solve problems. The residual void left by this infrastructure creates a discontinuity in the plan, in the reading of the plan here. It is unlike any space that DC is known for. The protagonists of this area are the Southwest and Southeast Freeway, 695, the Center Leg Freeway going north, tunneling under, across the mall, and the railroad, both passenger and freight train, passenger going up to Union Station, and freight train continuing southeast. To further complicate this area, the major roads, South Capitol Street and Washington Avenue, going through the center, were designed for high speed and high volume of vehicles and are unfriendly to pedestrians. This area is located at a junction between three major neighborhoods, Southwest, Capitol Hill, and Navy Yards. It's characterized by a diverse use of building uses that seem disconnected. The federal campus in blue, residential in yellow and orange, and scattered commercial buildings without a sense of organization. So zooming in the area, this residual void here created by the infrastructure is further compounded by the infrastructure itself, where the viaducts create massive walls through the city. Ramps and the viaducts are currently uncrossable. And to further complicate the problem, this area is plagued by a tremendous amount of surface parking. But let's imagine if we could reconnect the Delaware Avenue axis and reconnect the street grid. if we could create civic experience and create a connection between building uses, building residential from southwest up north, providing mixed-use commercial buildings anchored by a museum. This project is tied together by the idea of reconnecting a major diagonal axis that connects southwest to the most important building in the most important city in the United States, the U.S. Capitol building. So let's imagine if we could take this extreme circumstance and create a vision of a civic experience. So this project aims to bring civic experience, reconnect Delaware Avenue, bring value to this unusable real estate. And how do we do that? So we have three strategies. The High Line, connecting people across the region, reestablishing the street grid, and providing three civic spaces and approaches to a central urban space. So first, the High Line, which takes the existing railroad, and which is divisive and anti-civic, and proposes to build over top and along its path with civic infrastructure. And it connects at ground level at moments where the train tunnels underneath. It also provides a building for access to the existing Capital South Metro station. This High Line is similar in length and in form as the New York City High Line, where a landscaped experience and with opportunity for community gardens and moments of engaging the buildings. It also keeps in mind the idea of Chicago's 606 trail, which has created a biking highway through the city, in this case at a much longer length. It takes the existing biking network and connects it much farther, connecting Capital South Metro at Capitol Hill, Garfield Park at the edge of Navy Yards, and L'Enfant Plaza to the west. So it makes it easy for pedestrians and bikers to move around. But most importantly, it takes something that is now obstructive and creates a civic experience for traveling. The High Line overlaid with the Delaware axis starts to form a wedge shape, what might be an elevated plaza. It also reimagines the federal buildings could allow for an open access to the Capitol. The second strategy, reestablishing the street grid, is done where the highway is relatively low before it tunnels under and goes north across the mall. But we have to regain the intersections to do so. Therefore, we have to move the ends of those ramps so that they emerge in the center of streets and in the center of blocks, behaving almost as alleys. We deck over the necessary areas to form the block. The buildings can then bridge over to maximize the use of that air rights. They then push out to engage the plaza. Our third strategy, the three civic spaces and approaches to that plaza, are three different unique ways of changing elevation, made unique by the buildings that formed them. A winding street to the north, an office courtyard to the west, to the east, and a residential circle to the south. So here again are the three civic spaces in relation to our main diagonal axis, which you can see in this section, Delaware, along Delaware Avenue. So first, Delaware North, inspired by Lombard Street, San Francisco, although this at a much greater slope at 27% compared to 12% in our site. Looks to move people easily, pedestrians and bikers easily up and down, while providing intimate entry spaces for the buildings along the way. And it creates a really inviting and intimate experience. The slope is made easier by dividing the length in 6 bends. Underneath, parking for residents and public, access to a major portion of the block is done through a road underneath. And residents and visitors can also access the building through Washington Avenue, which would be on that side, and enter through a courtyard where they could access the cores of their respective buildings. Our second civic idea along East Street and the museum, the proposed Museum of Transportation. It is an office courtyard anchored by the museum building. And in this case, the slope is made very dramatic by a continuous set of stairs and compounded by the dramatic angle and points of the building. And along the way, you find garden terraces where office workers and the public can enjoy. So this is actually a really, to me, a really important idea where building and infrastructure become indistinguishable. Where building and infrastructure provide an experience that is spatial and transitional. The Museum of Transportation becomes activated by providing an easier path upwards through escalators, integrated parking lot underneath the plaza, and allowing further access directly to the plaza via elevator, where the circular building, a proposed bike shop and bike storage facility. Can also be accessed up through another small cylinder elevator through the interior of the building. And the roof of the Museum of Transportation engages the people by bending down and creating an amphitheater facing a museum screen, which then is aimed at the plaza to the west. At Delaware South, at its approach, it frames Capitol Building, inspired by and matching in diameter to the Circus of Bath in the UK, although made taller, as 300 feet is actually pretty wide space. Delaware Circle is a major node in the city. It is a point of arrival and transition as the public can access the upper portions via the grand stairs and also this glass glass volume where they can access the elevator core and they can make their way up along the top of the circle. Further access is made for parking and service underneath and through behind the blocks and across the grand stairs. The buildings on the upper portion crossing over the freeway are then accessed at the moment where the upper buildings and the lower buildings overlap, providing a core where residents and visitors can access through an arcade adjacent to the stairs. Inspired by the Spanish steps, and also very similar in change in elevation at about 5 stories. The grand stairs manipulate your way up, creating spaces so that it is more inviting and less intimidating when you look upwards. On your way down, Delaware Circle receives you, and facing the sun and the Potomac River, it becomes a really exciting view. Continuing on, crossing, bridging over the highway, we find yet another landscape space where residents and the public can share. So these 3 spaces culminate in the center wedge plaza space, which just so happens to be similar form and size to the Piazza di Spagna in Rome, at the bottom of the Spanish steps. This is a plan cutting at ground level, where you can see the system of streets that's been created, where the highway exits or ramps are coming underneath, the streets are built on top. And you can see where they're small, but in red diagrammatically pointed the access cores to the building. So Delaware Plaza is a place where the public, or the residents, the visitors, tourists, commuters, all come together and share park space, meet at a cafe, and take their bikes to get fixed or get stored. It is a place where you enjoy the museum, on axis with the South Capitol, with the U.S. Capitol building, on axis at a further distance to the Washington Monument, and with the new axis created by the Museum of Transportation. So I'd like to close the design and experience by sharing this project in animated form. So what we're going through now is the Delaware axis. now the street axis. Another important axis, Virginia Avenue, L'Enfant Plaza, connected by the High Line. So now I thank you all for being here, and I'll open up for questions and comments.
Throw it up in the air.
Just one question that you and I know about that I think you might want to answer is, why not just take the highway down?
Well, well, that's an interesting question. I don't know that I have the answer to that, but this is something that we've gone through and we tested by creating schemes that did that, and for multiple reasons, such as time constraints and complications where I found myself redesigning the freeway for way too long.
Your time constraints?
Time constraint is in the semester
For you,
will end.
for you,
Yeah,
not for the city.
right. Sorry. But yes, this thesis proposes to keep what's there. After speaking to some of the traffic engineers throughout the semester and the architect of the Capitol, it doesn't seem like the highway is going anywhere, and also the rail. So that was a major factor in making that decision.
Just to clarify that, the highway engineers, as you recall, Pedro, all said the problem is that this highway conducts an immense amount of people into the downtown, because when you go like this and then you cross under the mall to get to the downtown from Northern Virginia, which is a huge population center for the downtown. So most of the downtown crossings, and I don't know how much time we should spend on this, but just to be clear, most of the downtown crossings that run east-west are low. So the problem is less like getting rid of a highway, and if they ever were to change it, it would be more like changing it into the Big Dig, where you have a lot of, highway infrastructure that crosses town. So the thought is that because of the amount of people it conducts into the downtown, and there's only really 2 bridges that get across that it's very difficult to imagine just wishing it away. So just to be clear about that.
Yeah, just to interrupt the highway like that, this is less disruptive to build on top than to dig it. In Boston, they did the big dig like 25 years ago, and it was a mess. Your project, I'm sure you're aware, cost like $1.8 gazillion dollars. It will be more expensive if we have to bury that highway. Plus, you're making good use of all the field to bring the parking spaces, which are essential, and we wouldn't have that. I'm just impressed by your work, by your research, by your presentation, by the thoroughness of thought. That by how painstakingly and carefully the whole deal is put together. How I'm in love with this project. I think it's very intelligent. I'll say that right away. I do have one question regarding if there wasn't any chance to have actually vehicular traffic through your proposal that makes exquisite use of precedents to solve a new problem. And my other concern has to do with this ground level huge space that I would imagine it will work like some sort of commercial, not unlike any airport, right? Because that's humongous.
Yeah, this is actually currently a parking lot.
No, I mean the yellow
Here?
thing. No,
Oh, here.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
like a lot of square footage.
A lot of post shed.
Yeah.
Is it earth or that's
Well, so yeah, this will be cutting through the buildings actually. So in that case, that's cutting through the top portion of the
but
plot.
that yellow poche you have there, it's inhabitable?
Yeah,
So it's actual square
It's-
footage for
it's
commercial
parking.
use.
Show
Oh,
your
it's a
section.
section.
yeah,
Show them the section.
So that's the parking.
yeah. So you got parking over
Okay.
here, and then on that side would be the
All right.
under of the offices.
Okay. Yeah, since it's not drawn like parking, but it's. I'm impressed. How long did it take you to do this? Is it like one
Less
semester?
than you would think.
And he had time constraints?
Honestly, a month.
No, come on.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
Wow.
not the planning of it, but the production of the modeling, I should say.
Yeah, the rendering. Yeah,
The-
putting it together, making it happen. But
Right.
thinking and the initial drawings would take you for a while. Yeah. What did you say about the vehicular use of?
Yeah, actually, at first, I was assuming, this has been a very challenging project in terms of scale. And I was even under the impression that I would be able to bring vehicles up there. But it turns out that as I kept working and getting in closer, I realized that the change in elevation is just too great. You can see the farthest one being, to get to the street is actually a little bit longer, but at 430 feet total, changing 50 feet, like going 50 feet up, would not even give you, it wouldn't give you 5% slope for roads, for sure. It would be much greater than 8%. So,
You'll be able to see.
So it's too steep for vehicles.
unless we did really drastic winding road
That's
all the way up, which would take a lot of,
on the shallow side, on the steep side.
right.
You will have to move all that.
Because this top drawing up here, that's pretty, it's a lot of paving.
Mhm.
I mean, in most conditions like that, you look at something that looks like, this looks like a road should be there. And there's not one. So we need something to soften the space. I mean, it's a pretty, it's pretty severely paved space. It looks like it should have a road, that's it.
Mhm.
But it's, Vicki, it's a beautiful project, and I think you've done a great job. I'm still trying to understand it.
That's a good example of what architects do. They take a problem, they try to understand it really well, and then they get to the solution. And this is an ambitious problem. This is a huge problem. And it's also correcting what Azir did previously. So you want to do something new, but you also have to deal with damage that was done. And it's very impressive that you took such a challenge and all by yourself.
Not by myself.
Yeah, in reality, you won't have such a big project in one semester and just by yourself. It's really a big thing. But I love that you took examples from New York, Chicago, UK, for different areas. Yeah, okay. Excuse me. Yeah, you talk about Rome. I just want to know, like, what part of the project you like the most?
That's a good question. Well, in my opinion, there are moments where I did each thing, the 3 civic approaches, and I loved it, and then later you just kind of get used to it, and you realize how schematic it is, really the reality is that they're good because they have potential, not because they're good right now, but because they have potential. One of the things that, there's a lot of moments here that, would be great to continue designing. I think I'll tell you the one that I would start with is the museum portion. I think there's a lot of potential there. It's been kind of thrown together, but even so, what it is there now has a lot of potential. And I think that idea of merging building and infrastructure and creating something that it's just meant to create an experience for people while addressing their needs of moving, parking, driving, all these things. So I don't know, I don't think I have an answer to this.
One of the challenges and one of the interesting things about students finding thesis projects today in Washington, D.C. is that D.C. is limited by its size, right? It has a finite boundary. And with the building of the metro and the growth of the economy in D.C., it's become the kind of place where any site that is reasonably buildable within the city is now a candidate for development. And sites that we used to think about 30 years ago that nobody would touch now are becoming very serious considerations. So what Pedro didn't say is to the north of here at a place called Capitol Crossing, they're doing exactly this. They're building over a highway that probably shouldn't have been built, which is this highway too, but they're building over it because the value of the realizable gains of the development, is possible, and things that used to cost so much money in terms of infrastructure because we're running out of places to build are now becoming very viable. And so we may see more of this kind of thing, where people are looking at sites they wouldn't have looked at before, and they're seriously considering development there. And you can argue about the highway, maybe it shouldn't have been built, and maybe you should wish it away, and things like that. But what the model right now is that people are just saying, okay, it's there, let's figure out how to get around it and get over it and stuff. And it is the Capitol Crossing will be open next year, a year or something, and it's 3 million square feet or something of development. It's a huge project, and it's right over the highway. And so this is what's happening. And places that are near metro stations or around the core, like this, are seeing their value just go through the roof. And a lot of it is the pressure of the real estate world on the city, but also we now are building a cadre of engineers and architects that know how to do this.
First of all, congratulations. I'm really impressed, not only for the quantity of your work, but for the quality of your work. You give us a different perspective, different analysis, different tools, from the rendering, video, and beautiful, amazing drawings. So that's. But at the same time, I really impressed for the method, the approach that you use before to arrive at this solution, this design. I really like the idea that you start from the analysis from the before and after the urban renewal, and you talk about the re-establish the existing grid. So I think that is the really positive things to start as a first step for your project. At the same time, like my colleague said, I really appreciate the precedents that you mentioned, including Rome, of course, you said before. And also every single point of view is always related to the landmark. And so that is another amazing opportunity to develop your urban design project. That's very, very good. And also I like this idea that the infrastructure is combined with the building, like a one piece. It's usually always we consider two different stories, no? But in your case, is a perfectly, I mean, just this drawing in front of me is the synthesis of a pedestrian, vehicular, parking, museum. It's not, at the end, I appreciate that in the common space that you call the plaza, the piazza, you have this kind of public building as a museum, and that's a perfect location for that. So it's very difficult to me to find something that I don't like, you know. So it's I really appreciate. And compared to the Boston Big Dig, I think this works better because you can bike it, because you cannot bike there. So that is an interesting comparison, because one aspect that is difficult to resolve in this case, because you have a large space, is an urban scale project, sometimes it's very difficult to combine the large space design with human scale. But you know, with the slope, with the street, with the pedestrian biking path, I think you resolve very well. So that's my...
Thank you.
I just had one comment about the question that Professor Bell asked you at the beginning, right? Why didn't you think of just moving the highway, right? Getting rid of it and wishing it away and doing your own thing. I think it's very important that you knew how to work with a limitation. And it's a limitation in every sense. It's acoustic. I mean, I'm sure the traffic is heavy, as you've said. It's a visual limitation because it's not pretty. But at the same time, you need to kind of learn how to work with this. And in your thesis, you have demonstrated that you know how to work very well with a very big limitation. And this is important in our work because we don't always have, you know, a lot of ground, and you say, okay, this is all for you. You can do whatever you like and make it pretty. But you've managed to do that. You've managed to make it pretty, to make it aesthetically pleasing, to work around your limitation, and also to give DC a public space. I understand, especially in this image, what we were saying before about it looks as if there should be a street there because it is a lot of hardscape. But there is something in potential projects that needs to kind of be left open because there needs to be the potential for any kind of something that comes up during construction. And that's often the case, right? Something comes up and you kind of have to move the bike racks, make a kiosk, I don't know, something. So I think you worked very well with everything, you know, all of your elements, and the project is very well composed. I mean, this is very difficult to believe that you did it in just 1 month. You must have not slept much. So,
I did not.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
He doesn't sleep.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, I sleep.
Yeah.
Tonight I'll sleep.
Professor Bell, you had something you wanted to say, and
I don't know if the other committee members, Steve, do you have something you want to add into?
Pedro, fabulous project, terrific job. You did it great.
Steve heard speechless.
Maybe just a few too many trees. Other than that, it's actually terrific. You did it, you pulled it off. You know, it's so thorough, so well presented. Absolutely terrific. It's such a complicated, I don't think we've ever seen anybody take on such an enormously complicated project and resolve it at this level. Just absolutely terrific.
Thank you.
So I agree with everything Steve said. It was quite a pleasure to be on the committee, Pedro. And just a couple of thoughts. Number one, I know you had a lot of anxiety because we tackled some of this last fall. But I think there's a great lesson in that, which is that you can take something that maybe a studio did and advance the thinking even further. And while this certainly benefits from some of that work, it takes it to another level, which is I think what a thesis ought to do. So you to be complimented on that, that's really terrific. The second thing is the thoroughness with which you're able to sort of solve so many problems is really great. And, you know, oftentimes in a city like Washington, D.C., it's, yes, we have the monuments, but what a lot of people always tell me when they come to Washington is, I knew there were all these monumental buildings, but I never knew there were such beautiful streets and great public spaces. And that's kind of a nice thing to see here, that it combines that thinking with also some monuments like the museum, and I think that is in the spirit of Washington. I think the site is extraordinarily difficult. I agree a little bit with the comments about the amount of hardscape, but you know, it seems like maybe there's a bit much. Maybe it's the point of view of that perspective that one might want to rethink. But I think that's something that, you know, doesn't argue about the conceptualization of the project, more about some of the details, which I think is a fair game to criticize. The other point I would make is this. You know, some of the jury may know this, but Pedro was on a major competition team, and it took about a month out of his semester. And so when he says he did this in a month, he isn't making that up. That's no BS. He actually did it in about a month. And the panic look on his face at most of the committee meetings about how the hell he was going to get this ambitious project done was, you know, I mean, I could understand, but I knew we all had confidence in his ability to be able to do it. Which leads me to conclude that maybe we ought to just give thesis students less time to do stuff rather than more time. So they all call this panic and just shred it.
You know, at the beginning I alluded to an image that Professor Ambrose, I know, has shared with students. I assume you've shared this image with students. You've certainly shared it with me enough and with our colleagues enough that design is a process that's not unlike those old vaudeville acts where the guy would be on stage with a whole bunch of plates. I don't know if you remember this. At least we may be the last generation that have seen this act, where you have plates and they're on the end of these sticks, these poles, and they start spinning, and he gets all these plates up in the air, and they're all spinning at the same time. You have to keep them all going and spinning. Well, actually, that's what being an architect really is all about at the end of the day. You can't let any of the plates fall. Occasionally one wobbles and just about hits the ground, but you really have to keep them all up in the air. And so I would just say to even further complicate it, there was the ULI competition that you and your colleagues were involved in and really went into the final round of that competition, so it did take a significant amount of time out of the picture. Also, there's a whole cadre of people that we're looking at yesterday and today, Aaron and Pedro and Steve and Emily and Sarah, who had the most intensive TA position in the school, where each of them were in charge of about 30 students in the first year studio, where they were teaching actively, and those of us in the front row that have taught quite a bit know that after you're in a design studio, one of the hardest things to do is to go back to the boards and actually work on something of your own, because you're the null set. You're a sponge that's been ring bound after that kind of thing. So that's keeping all the plates up in the air. This is a testament, I think, to the power of design. And it reminds me of a lot. I remember when I first started teaching over 30 years ago, I remember Steve Hurt telling me that one of the things that we do with students in design studio is we get them to do things they cannot do. And what's really important is we never, as faculty members, we can never let on that students don't know how to do what it is they're doing or can't do what they're doing. So you had said I had more confidence in you than you had in you. And I want to share with you, there were moments where I too shared that sort of deep worry that maybe we wouldn't get to the finish line, but I couldn't share that with you. That would have been very bad for me to share that with you. The important thing was to keep you moving forward and to let you find how the power of design can actually get you to where you need to be. An actionable design process, something that makes design thinking a useful tool. And you had demonstrated to me in the past numerous times that you could do that. And so in my opinion, although I too shared your anxiety, There's a number of times where we'd have unscheduled meetings and talk about this and that. And at times up in the room for the charrette room for the ULI that had come in when all of your colleagues were out of there, and we'd talk thesis to kind of steal some time out of the ULI. You know, I too shared that concern, that anxiety, but I also knew that you, and this is true of probably everybody out here that is working in a design studio, is that you need to be able to channel that positive thought about design. When I did my thesis project, first thesis at Notre Dame, one of my critics, Norman Crowe, used to gently tell me about the problem I was having with design, which was I would start to draw something and then I would not draw it because I would realize that it was a stupid idea. And what I had learned from people like Steve Hurt and Norman Crowe over the years was, no, you draw it anyhow. You keep drawing it. You draw it until you break through. Drawing is the vehicle that gets us to where we need to be. So I want to congratulate you in the fact that you kept going forward with this. You kept using the tools of design to push you forward, even in those moments where you had deep doubt. And you broke through that deep doubt and pushed forward. The other thing I want to also say is that getting to the point of this presentation that Pedro just did was not easy. You and I were like, as late as Monday morning, banging our heads against the wall, sort of full body slams into each other about what this presentation needed to be. And many of the students, I think, know that I'm a big fan of that very short video on TED by Simon Sinek that talks about begin with the why. That you have to start with the why, and then you tell the what and the how, and then you end again with the why to remind people why it is we're doing all this. And you did that. And I really have to congratulate you. And you did it in a way that I wouldn't have done it. You did it in Pedro's way. And again, you used the power of design. So I want to congratulate you. But I also want to say one other thing, and let's talk about this at the very end of the day. There are projects, today's the day of big projects, bold projects. Not that yesterday was a day of not a day of bold projects. But today, some of these projects are right in your face, like this kind of thing. Freeway, not going to stop me. I'm going to build over the top of it. We're going to be looking at a lot of projects that are bold projects today. And I was just talking with Ronit, a little sidebar, and what we need to do is to put these projects out in people's face. So immediately there are venues for each of these theses. Each of the theses that we've looked at, all 16 of these theses ought to be part of the DC AIA District Architecture Center Thesis Forum that's coming up in a couple of weeks. And David Leitsma sent us a link to that, and I'll resend the link to you guys. It's got to be part of that. There's Visions of Unbuilt DC, which is an annual thing. There are several projects that engage DC, and they need to do that. Project in the moment we'll see in Baltimore needs to go to Baltimore. We need to be able to get this stuff out there so other people share in the great work that's been done. Pedro, this has been a lot of fun. Sorry that it's all over. Maybe we're going to keep it going. But there's a new phase for you out there. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So we're going to pick ourselves up.